In this lesson, we discuss causes of variation and assumptions of the ANOVA. What is causes of variation which are present in any kind of experiment? Usually, the causes of variation have two types. There are two kinds of causes of variation. One assignable cause of variation, two chance causes of variation. What is meant by assignable causes of variation? In any particular process, in any particular conduction of any particular process, usually the variation may be present in the process. Some kind of variation, inherent variation. It is inherent, which is observed in any particular process. Anywhere in conducting the experiment or in doing any particular production process, the variation is inherent, which is observed in any particular process. Here the assignable causes of variation, which are nothing but controlled causes of variation. Controlled variation comes under assignable causes of variation, which can be identified and which can be eliminated, which can be identified and which can be traced. Such kind of variation is known as assignable causes of variation. The variation which can be identifiable, which are controlled causes of variation, which are controlled, such kind of variation is known as assignable causes of variation. For example, we have applied two kinds of treatments, treatment number 1 and 2. Two treatments which are applied. What is the significance difference between the two treatments, treatment number 1 and treatment number 2? If you have applied one particular treatment, treatment number 1 on some 4 or 5 plots in the agricultural field, and treatment number 2 has applied on another 5 to 6 plots, then what is the yield if you have observed? You have calculated on 5 plots, we have calculated some 800 to 900 kilos of yield we observed. On an average, for example, we got 150 kilos on an average to a particular plot. The yield of from the treatment number 1 by applying the treatment number 1. Similarly, treatment number 2, by applying treatment number 2, we got some another 160 kilos of yield. Then obviously we can say this much, this is the difference, which is treatment number 2 is giving more yield, more crop than treatment number 1. That is fertilizer number 2 or fertilizer number 1 we can call. Fertilizer number 2 is more effective than fertilizer number 1. Like that, whatever the causes, what are the causes of variation we can identify. So this is the cause of variation. With such variation is known as due to the treatments, due to the applying the fertilizers, due to the fertilizer. This variation can be observed. This much of variation can be observed from one group to another group. That is applying treatment number 1. Observations obtained according to treatment number 1 or observations obtained according to treatment number 2. That is, if you consider two particular groups, from the two particular groups we can easily identify group 1 to group 2 because of applying the treatment we get some particular variation. Such variation is known as assignable causes of variation, which can be identified due to the treatment, due to the fertilizer. This fertilizer is more effective, this fertilizer is not more effective, not that much of effective, and such kind of comparison we can give because of the treatment. Treatment is the one such factor to observe the variation. So the variation is observed due to that particular treatment. So the such kind of identifiable causes of variation, controlled variation. So such variation is also known as controlled variation. The variation can be controlled. Then when applying the second time, a third time, we can definitely we can definitely apply in more appropriate manner, in effective method of using and applying the fertilizer. So such variation, whatever the variation which can be identified, which can be measured, which can be identified through a particular treatment, such variation is known as assignable causes of variation. And secondly, so that is the first cause of variation, and second causes of variation, chance causes of variation. So first one is assignable causes of variation, and second one is chance causes of variation. Chance causes of variation. Chance causes of variation. First one is assignable causes of variation. Just now we have discussed chance causes of variation. The chance causes of variation is nothing but which cannot be controlled by human endeavor. By human hand we cannot control and we cannot identify by human endeavor, and such kind of variation is nothing but chance cause of variation. I give you one suitable example to understand, which is same treatment was applied. In the last example, we have applied 2 or more than 2 treatments, and we are observing what is the effect between one treatment to another treatment, what is the variation by applying treatment number 1, treatment number 2, treatment number 3, etc. How many treatments, how many fertilizers, or how many different cultivation processes we have applied. And then secondly, now we are applying the same treatments on some particular experimental units, on some particular plots. For example, we have taken 10 plots and we have applied same treatment. Even then, same treatment on different experimental units, on different plots of the agricultural field. But we got again the variation. Why we got some particular variation? That is because of what? Which particular cause? Why this was that the variation took place? Such variation is nothing but due to erratic fashion. Due to erratic fashion which is observed in the field. Even though the same kind of field we have considered and which were divided into plots and the same treatment was applied, but even then the variation is observed. One particular plot of equal shape, size, etc. And one particular plot is giving 100 kilos, another particular plot is giving 105 kilos, another particular plot is giving some 108 kilos, etc. So the variation between one particular unit to another unit, the yield, that is whatever the observational crop, the yield of the crop is going to be observed. That is the measurement which is observed from one unit to another unit which differs. The variation is identified. Such variation cannot be identified. Such variation cannot be identified. Whatever the variation we observed, the variation cannot be identifiable by human endeavor. That cannot be identified by human endeavor, and such variation is known as chance causes of variation. The variation cannot be identified and cannot be eliminated and identified by human endeavor. By human hand, we cannot control such kind of variation. Hence, it is also called uncontrolled variation. Uncontrolled factors of variation. The variation is not controlled by some kind of factors which are called uncontrolled factors. So such variation is known as chance causes of variation. So there are 2 causes of variation in the analysis of variance ANOVA, and 1 assignable causes of variation, 2 chance causes of variation. And these are the 2 causes of variation. Now come to the assumptions of ANOVA. What are the assumptions of analysis of variance? There are 3 main assumptions of analysis of variance. First one, all the observations are independent. All the observations are independent. What are the observations we are making from the by applying the treatments on some particular plots which must be independent. all are should be independent. All should be independent. All the observations should be independent. And the second one, whatever the observations you have taken, we should taken from the normal. The parent population from which the observations are taken should be normal. So from the normal list, we have to, that is, we have to, what are the observations we have considered, we have to take it from we have to apply it from to the normal distribution. So whatsoever the observations, the independent observations we have drawn, we have taken, all the observations must be first of all the independent. All the observations must be independent, and whatsoever the observations which are drawn, the parent population which is drawn is to be normal, which is to be taken as normal. The parent population which the observations are to be drawn is normal. And the third one, all the effects are additive in nature. All the effects means various treatment effects, various environmental effects, the various effects which are may not be identifiable, controlled and uncontrolled, all the kinds of effects which are going to be additive in nature. If you get controlled and uncontrolled factor of variation, it should be equal to the total variation. The total variation must be, that is going to be, can be splitted into the variation due to the controlled factors, variation due to the uncontrolled factors. If you get the sum of all kinds of variation, we should get the total, which means it is just not only for applicable for the variation, it is also applicable for all kinds of statistical analysis is going to be made. So therefore the last point is all effects are additive in nature, which means treatment effects and environmental effects which are all additive in nature. These are based on these three assumptions. Analysis of variance is going to be conducted. ANOVA, analysis of variance is going to be conducted.